What's up, guys? Your boy Johnny Bananas here. The Challenge Season 40 Battle of the Eras is finally upon us. I'll be covering every episode with all your favorite challengers on my podcast, Death, Taxes, and Bananas, on the Ringer Reality TV podcast feed, and on the brand new Ringer Reality TV YouTube channel, where you can find full video episodes all season long. So buckle up, come along with me as we see who will be crowned winner of the Challenge Season 40 Battle of the Eras. Follow Ringer Reality TV on Spotify and subscribe to us on YouTube.
Basketball is so very good. I had to let a scream out there because technical issues have caused everything to go haywire. But we're in a part of the time of the year where, you know, there is a calm. There's a hush that's over the NBA, a sort of a silence where there are teams potentially laying and waiting, ready to level up, or teams ready to make a move towards the title or contention. But there's no two people I'd rather talk about this than two basketball savants. I feel like I drank 10 cups of coffee, ready to roll. I'm here with Michael Pina, who is looking healthy, and Sirat Sohi, who is also looking healthy. They are primed. They're ready. Guys, how you doing? How you handling the offseason?
I'm doing great.
Yeah, lovely. Post Labor Day vibes. NBA is the only thing on my mind right now, as I'm sure it's going with most people. So I'm really, really excited to hop in.
Yeah. Well, today we're going to just be sort of discussing, we're looking ahead to the season. We're sort of kind of figuring out where our eyes should be, who's going to regress, who's going to move forward, who's going to be sneaky, chippy. Pina came up with this topic today where we were just going to kind of go through and talk broadly about some teams that we have giddy expectations for, or we're excited to watch for. You brought it up as we're excited for a variety of reasons. Maybe we'll do it this way. We'll just say we'll go through. We've each picked two teams. We weren't supposed to reveal to each other who the teams were.
One of us did broke that rule almost immediately.
Two of us did.
One of us wasn't informed of the rules before.
I was saying, well, Sirat and I both.
One of us was unaware that was a condition, although I should have known because of how much Pina loves secrets.
Yeah, I do.
Does Pina love secrets? This is the first time I'm hearing about this. Is that something that is?
That's why his hair is so big.
Oh, I see. Well, so I think so even though a third of the teams are already sort of revealed, you guys don't know who it is. So we'll just kind of go through. I guess we'll say the team, and maybe we'll just say why we're excited to watch the team. It might not be just pure excitement. Maybe it will be. But Pina, since it's you were the leader of this or the creator of this discussion, I'll give you the honors. Who's the first team on your list that you're the most excited to watch, and tell us why, just to start off with.
So this team, first of all, great job on the intro.
Thanks, man.
Kyle.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed that. This team, I think I will watch more than any other team this entire season, and it is the San Antonio Spurs. They have Victor Wembanyama.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of him?
I have.
He is the best defensive player in the world. He is the most fascinating young offensive player in the world, and when you watch him play, you can't help but imbue this childish wonder, because every time he takes the court, he's going to do something that you've literally never seen before. He just has this combination of size and length and agility and like total fearlessness. He's like willing to be vulnerable on a basketball floor in a way that not very many young superstars are. And so watching him play and watching him ascend, surrounded by the actual familiar NBA players and names and personalities that he did not have last year as a rookie, like Chris Paul, Harrison Barnes. It's a real rotation, a real 9-man rotation now. I just think the Spurs are going to be really good and should compete for a play-in spot, which is kind of astonishing given where they've been the past few seasons.
Yeah.
Yep.
Can I sharpen one of the things you said? Because I think it's really interesting. You said vulnerability. What does vulnerability on offense look like to you in basketball?
I think just his personality is more so what I'm referring to. Like, he's just not afraid to fail. Like he just does him on the court. He is super bold. He is, he'll try stuff and be willing to fail. And I don't think a lot of guys are out here we're willing to do that. So it's like a factor and an element of him that I really appreciate, just watching him as he improves and evolves as this like future face of the sport. It's awesome to see.
Yeah, there's a willingness to try new things. It makes him one of the more fun players to watch, especially when you consider like the canvas that he is painting with. It's just incredible. Like there's like I've one of my favorite plays of him last season was, it was against the Celtics. Like he's being guarded by Derek White. He's midair. He thinks about finger rolling and he just like twists his hands and then he twists them back for a dunk. And it was like just one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen. And just I feel you on the childish joy too, because the game just looks different when Wembanyama plays it. Like it's strange. It has a way of slowing down and speeding up at the same time. One of my favorite things to watch with him is just the fact that like, as much as we, are astonished by his strides, and I think we started doing this really when Giannis came into the league, the counting of, he got, up half court, in 3 strides. The interesting thing about Wembanyama, because of the dynamic type of scorer he wants to be, because of the things that he's able to do in half court, and because of his size, he actually has to make his strides smaller sometimes. Like he has this sort of like protracted way of moving that I just find so fascinating and just speaks to his grace. And the other vulnerability thing, man, like the crying after Team USA lost to France. It was one of the most, it was sad, but it was also one of the most terrifying things that I've ever seen. And if you're a Spurs fan, you should be delighted by the fact that, your boy was going through pain. He put it all out there and he failed. And I think Peanut goes exactly to what you're talking about on and off the court. The guy is just, he has everything. He has the body, he has the skill, but he has the heart and he has the patience. He's got the full package. And I think the Spurs could have that one OKC season where Chris Paul was there and they made the playoffs. And then Chris Paul went, off to Phoenix and then they fell back into the lottery. Not necessarily the worst thing for them, wouldn't necessarily be the worst thing for a Spurs team that I think could use a lot more talent around Wembanyama. But I just think that this season is going to be awesome for him as a learning experience and for us as fans.
Oh, no doubt it's going to be fun to watch just because I think the broadest strokes of basketball, like in terms of he appeals to what I would say is like the Good Morning America kind of level basketball fan, where it's just like my dad who doesn't give a crap about the NBA could tune in and be like, holy shit, because he pops off the screen in a really, interesting, just novel way. But I think there are a few things here in what you said, Pina, that I think are interesting is that like, first of all, yeah, he has that vulnerability. He has that freedom to experiment, and he has that freedom to that leash to go do those things because of what he is on the defensive end. I'm curious to pick your brain on the defensive rankings, sort of, because I know you're a big Bam guy in terms of the best defender, AD also. But teams, this other I think reoccurring theme is going to reappear, I think, as we talk about these teams, and that's this idea of teams that are close and how to decide how close you are. And how damaging the aggressive decisions can be when you think you're close and you're not, or when it's time to be assertive, when maybe just when to be assertive overall, I think is an interesting point. But I think for the Spurs, it all kind of revolves around like Wemby's vulnerability is tolerable, I think, because he's unlike a lot of players in that he doesn't have like a self-sabotaging idea of who he is, like a distorted idea that leads him down roads that are not productive or not efficient. Because I let me know if you all agree with this, that like whether or not, last year a lot of his offense shifted whenever the Spurs stopped playing. I mean, this was widely covered. I covered it a lot. Whenever they stopped playing Zach Collins, you get that big out there that is like not spacing him. And then I think we started to see him drive the ball more. I'm curious, like, where do you all think offensively the Spurs are going to grow the most, other than just the maturity? Chris Paul comes in. How do you think it's going to be a matter of him getting more easy baskets, or do you all expect his face-up game was the thing in his game that looked good, but it was never quite efficient enough to be like his primary mode of offense? Where do you all expect him to grow offensively, and how do you think that's going to affect the Spurs winning games?
Yeah, I think that just overall, the Spurs taking an approach that is less experimental and more traditional this season in terms of how they built their roster was so necessary and will serve Wemby good for the rest of his career. And I already mentioned Chris Paul coming in. We talked about him. I know he's probably over the hill, even though last year on the Warriors, he was actually pretty good. And they had a plus net rating when he was on the court. When he was on the court without Steph Curry, which is like basically nothing. It's like Kevin Durant didn't even do that when he was on the Golden State Warriors. Like Chris Paul is still really competent and a quality player. And just last year learning that, as you said, they didn't know that he could be the 5, like from the jump. So they had Zach Collins. They would always play him with another big as this like pseudo stretch 4. Those days are already over. He's going to be the starting center. They bring in Harrison Barnes. He's the more traditional stretch 4 body type. And, you have a little bit of shooting around. You have Devin Vassell, who I absolutely adore. Love him. Love everything about Devin Vassell's game. Keldon Johnson. And I think most importantly, you always have a point guard on the court with him. Like Jeremy Sohan will not play a second of point guard this year. Like there's just no science lab right now. Maybe like Victor is like the science experiment, but like everything around him is just normal NBA basketball. In terms of just how their rotation will be, Pop's rotation and his lineups constructions. So I don't know if I answered your question, but like they'll look more normal, but they will have this like 7-4 ridiculous, unprecedented being elevating everyone around him also. So they're just so exciting to me.
Sarah, what do you think?
I think it's a lot of good points by Pina. Obviously, yes. Like I just think the sheer, the amount of easy baskets that he's going to get this year compared to last is going to go up astronomically. The lobs from Chris Paul, they were just basic basketball plays that the Spurs were not able to make last year, especially in the first half of the season. I think that, and to the credit of some of the younger guys on the team, they did get better throughout the season, but it's not the same as having a guy like Chris Paul out there. I think that's going to be awesome for, down the roster. He just has the skill for organization that a young team, we saw it in Phoenix too, right? Like that team really figured out who it was. A guy like Mikal Bridges, for example, figured out exactly where he was going to get his shots from. A guy like DeAndre Ayton had his career years with Chris Paul. Despite what, may or may not have been happening off the court, he just has this way of allowing everybody else on the roster to know exactly what they're supposed to do. But then, you do have this extra twist with Wembanyama where, to your point earlier, Kyle, about the idea of Wemby not necessarily having this self-sabotaging idea of who he's supposed to be. I don't know if it's as much that or the fact that he just has such expansive potential that we don't want him to limit himself in any way. So even when he does, I do think he takes a few too many step back threes every once in a while. I don't love seeing that early in the clock from him, but at the same time, I also don't really care because he's so young and I just want him to continue exploring, the potential of what he could be. And we are probably 2 or 3 years away from even wanting to start having that conversation about, what is his limiting skill sets are, the places that he needs to go away from. But just being able to, put it all on, this canvas that I think is just going to be a lot more structured this year. It's going to be really exciting. And I think it's also going to allow him to get a better sense of the player that he's supposed to be too, because, as much as it's great to, have freedom, and I think that's something that's very important to him, it is good to also start working within some sort of confine of an NBA offense just to see, because it's different. It's different once you actually start to try to win. It's like you do start to pay for some of the things that you're not necessarily supposed to be doing that aren't really, in service of your team. I also, I think this is a guy who also kind of, he might need some sort of challenge imposed onto him as well. Because the one thing that we saw in the second half of the season and the Olympics that was just absolutely terrifying to me was the absolutely casual nature in which he dominated. He looks bored sometimes. And then after a while you realize it's not like this performative nonchalance. He really is this calm because, frankly, it really is this easy for him sometimes. Like, he's a guy who, he dunks the ball, he barely gets a foot off the ground, and he looks like feathery while he does it. He doesn't have to use a lot of power. So I think that's actually going to be a fascinating challenge for him, for his trainers, for San Antonio in general, is just how do you get the most out of this guy when, the best way is to, we always say iron sharpens iron. The best way to do that is to give him as many challenges as possible when it just feels like he just blows right through them in, just astronomic speed.
Yeah, he's an interesting Venn diagram overlap of a lot. I mean, you could go, there's a lot of ways that he overlaps in ways other players just have not. But I think an interesting one is that he's in this body. He's very intelligent, like we talked about. He's open to things. He's an experimenter. There's a playfulness among the best players ever and the best players in the world right now that he has. And then also that he's just a competitive motherfucker. That's the other thing, like you said. And he's unfazed by it. He wants to kill everybody. But if I'm looking at the Spurs, I think, as we wrap them up and kind of move on and put a bow on what we think they're going to do, Pina, I'll go to you for your prediction for that in a second. But over the past couple of years, you mentioned Sohan playing point guard. Everybody was gnashing their teeth over that. We talked about even Vassell and Keldon. These are guys who were probably overexerted a little bit. It's good that I see you're maintaining the faith with Vassell, because I know some people kind of got off the train with some of that was going on. But those guys were pushed to kind of their limits, I think, in terms of heavy reps as decision makers and scorers and passers and whatever it is. Do you think that was sort of like hypertrophy that was like by design? Do you think that they were pushing those guys and letting those guys learn lessons that when they regress back into more sensible roles on a sensible, sane team that like Chris Paul is a good person to lead? Do you think that was by design, or do you think that they were just like erroneously experimenting with the Spurs this past year?
That's a great question. I think the stakes were nothing, like literally absent from the situation. So like they wanted to lose, it seemed to me pretty clear. And so I just didn't take a lot of it seriously, frankly. And I was hoping that this year they would be a little bit more determined and intentional with the players that they wanted to put around him and how they wanted to use him. And they're doing that and I was shocked that they got Chris Paul. You like never see a player like that so late in his career willingly go to a situation where he has 0% chance of winning the championship. That's like the whole thing with him. And so to go here, be a starting point guard, help Victor on the court, but then also, as you talked about, competitive motherfucker, Chris Paul is like first ballot Hall of Fame in that category. And so I think that the way that Chris Paul rubs off on Victor and teaches him things about NBA life and what it means to be great, I think that that's just invaluable also.
That's also, I know we're not talking about this, but that's also just a really fascinating way to decide to end your career, to take your twilight years and say, instead of ring chasing, I am going to find value in teaching. And I imagine that,
I'm paying it forward.
Oklahoma.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool. Like, and I imagine his stops in Oklahoma and Phoenix really taught him the value of that. And even, with the Warriors, Pajemski, Kuminga, Moody, those guys, like he was really, he was like, it was a whole bunch of young guys and Chris Paul on that bench, making them better, to the point of them actually being able to be a plus team in those minutes. It's not like he was like buoyed by a whole bunch of other guys. He was the organizing force. And I think that it's really interesting that he found value in that and that he decided to go down that route with, the guy who's potentially going to be the face of the NBA in a few years, maybe sooner than we even think. It's just cool. I think I think it's a really nice contrast, to, this culture of like ring chasing, especially when you put it in the context of everything else that Chris Paul has accomplished. To then have a ring would really actually vault him up a few stratospheres in terms of like, all-time legacy rankings. When we talk about, years later, when people go on Wikipedia, they will bash Chris Paul for not having a ring. And I think in this moment, we should just acknowledge the fact that
but if you know, you know.
If you know,
that's the thing.
It's going to be an all-time if you know, you know.
For sure. But like, there's like at the same time, there's a lot of people who don't know and won't bother to know. And the fact that he's just kind of put that to the wayside to do this thing that has created a level of fulfillment for him, I think is just really cool.
Yeah. The floor for Chris Paul teams historically is high. Now, like the ceiling doesn't reach to the point where he's like going to elevate you to a title, but he's never he elevates. That's what he does. So, all right, just putting a bow on this. I mean, you mentioned you think they're going to maybe potentially flirt with the play-in game. Who do you think? I mean, how high do we think? Let's make record predictions. These are soft record predictions. I mean, is that realistic? Let's pull that question apart. Do we think it's possible that they could get to that level? Like, how do you all feel?
I think I'm going to throw a number out there in win total that's borderline sacrilegious, but I think 44 wins is on the table for them. Like they won 22 last year. I could see a improvement level similar to what we saw from the Houston Rockets 2 years ago to last season. That's how impressed I was with Victor last year. And particularly when you just focus in on him with a real point guard, Trey Jones, and playing the five, like they were awesome. So a whole season of that, I think they'll be really good.
Yeah, I don't even think that's that ridiculous, to be honest. I'm just looking at like their last 10 games this season, and I know that you get into the garbage time with you get some teams that are resting, but they beat a Nuggets team that really needed a win, and that game could have actually that game probably tipped how the rest of the Western Conference race went in the playoffs as well, because of the seeding implications of it for them to win that game, but also, to go, I think it was 6-4 or like 7-4 in the final stretch of the season too, when they really started to figure some things out. It almost, again, like we keep making the Phoenix comparison, but like remember when like before Phoenix got Chris Paul, they also went 8-0 in the bubble and showed this little this kernel of potential of what this team could actually be. And I think that a similar thing could be going on in San Antonio, especially I just expect a leap. I expect a guy like Vassell to just thrive in a more structured offense. I was going to go with 45.
Wow.
So yeah,
this is a pro Spurs podcast.
It's a pro Spurs podcast. It's a pro Spurs podcast. I just think I think sometimes like these little things can help you make exponential leaps. And by the way, for those of you listening, Pina is wearing a San Antonio Spurs cap right now. I think before we move on, we have to mention that.
We all enter these pods knowing that it could be on social media. So I'll assume he's not trying to totally hide it there. But I was thinking somewhere in the 40, 41. I mean, maybe high 30s, mainly just because if they are leaning on CP3, he is getting long in the tooth and has had a history of missing time. So fair. I could see that softening that positive growth a little bit. So I'd thread the needle somewhere in the middle. So there we go. Our first team, San Antonio Spurs. Second team, Sirat Sohi. Who do you got? Who's your team you're excited to watch, and for what reason?
We've mentioned them a number of times here. I'm going to go with the Phoenix Suns. Another team that I think last year.
I didn't expect that one with this trio of people, but go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
What's that?
I don't know. I feel like Pina has cynical thoughts on Devin Booker as opposed to Ant Edwards, which I'd be curious to debate at some point on this, but I won't speak for him. But yeah, I didn't expect that one. Continue. Sorry.
Yeah, we can get into that. But yeah, I'm again sort of that thing of like minor changes creating exponential growth. I just think that they had a really, really good off season for what they were capable of doing. I think that hiring Mike Budenholzer to coach a team that was number one in mid-range pull-up frequency last season is going to do wonders for the efficiency of their offense. Like, we are talking about a guy who, the second he got to Milwaukee, he threw tape onto the practice floor at like all the corners behind the 3-point line and basically told us, guys, this is where you're spacing out to. And there were growing pains within that, especially for a guy like Chris Middleton who loves the mid-range, but they all eventually embraced it. And I think that, just like one tiny step behind the arc for Kevin Durant, for Devin Booker, for Bradley Beal, who, by the way, are really, really good 3-point shooters, could do wonders for that offense. And, it's an interesting thing when that team got together with Beal. We wondered if they would have any capability of defending, but just that the offense would figure itself out. It ended up being the opposite. They were 9th in offensive efficiency, and that's not enough for how that team was constructed. They needed to be top 5. They needed to be top 3, frankly. They needed to be blisteringly good and unguardable, and they weren't. And they actually managed to have an average defense, which that, I don't think I didn't have that on my
fluke, absolute fluke.
Okay.
Continue.
Okay. Yeah. For an entire
there's our
season.
next talking point, but yeah,
an entire season of fluky defense. Love to see it. Do you believe in fluky titles, Pina?
I was gonna say, well, how do you have fluky defense? What even? What is that even?
3-point luck. What are we going to?
Well, that's the only variable. That's it,
yeah,
right? How else?
82 games of 3-point luck.
Sarah, are you done with your intrigue with the Phoenix Suns?
Yeah, you got it.
It seemed snarky, but it wasn't. I know. Keep going. I was hoping it'd be snarky, but yeah, continue.
You didn't even mention the reason why I would be optimistic about them is they took care of the point guard position.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that until you cut me off.
I knew it. They actually have depth this year. They grabbed 2 of the kings of assisted turnover ratio with Tyus Jones and Monte Morris. And I think that was just really smart, and getting them on the contracts that they did, particularly Tyus. It was one of the great steals of the offseason contractually. But then Mason Plumlee, I think, is a really quality backup big as well, behind Yusuf Nurkic, who could very well, usually gets hurt and didn't really last season. So I'm kind of waiting for that to happen. But I hear you with the Coach Bud's influence on the offense. I want to, see it before I can believe it, unfortunately. But yeah, I just think defensively, there's a lot of question marks. There's a lot of who's going to play with who and how long. And Grayson Allen has to play, but if you play Grayson Allen, Beal, Booker, and Tyus Jones, you can't, because your defense will be terrible. So I think that there's some issues. How are they going to get Royce O'Neal on the court in those lineup configurations with the big 3? Will Bradley Beal ever what is his? I don't know. So I just think that I have more questions. I respect the talent, and I think Coach Bud is a really good tactician. But yeah, I have questions about them. Not to mention the health issues with KD, who played a ton of games last year.
I'm extremely dubious of the perimeter defense. I just don't know. That's something that's going to kind of come up with some other teams that we talk about. And this is always the balancing act. There aren't many Boston Celtics out there in the world that can both get their best offensive lineups and their best defensive lineups on at the same time. It's one or the other. And I'm just kind of wondering if Phoenix tried to address that with some of their value plays in the draft. They picked up Ryan Dunn, who's this big monster 6'8" guy who can switch and stuff like that. But offensively very challenged. We talk about Royce O'Neal, same thing. I just kind of wonder if that's going to be a big issue for them. But I'm curious, coming into the season, Pina and I had a conversation. I don't even remember what prompted it. We were talking about top 10 or something, and we got in on the subject of Booker and Ant. And I felt like last season, it seemed like in the sort of mainstream talking about credibility with players, it seemed like Booker receded from the view a little bit, I thought. But if you look at the numbers, he didn't really. He came on and 3-point percentage last year, had a good uptick there. He was sharing the ball, up 1.4 assists year over year from 2022-23. Overall was just asked to do a lot more of that. Do you all think that should we expect a bigger scoring year from him now that they have tied down the point guard position a little bit more? Or I'm kind of wondering if we see a Booker surge and maybe an Ant has sort of a plateau year a little bit offensively, where he kind of that conversation is still interesting to me. Those two players.
Yeah, I think before we get to the Ant part of it, I think that the biggest thing with Booker is going to be just a change in the configuration of how he gets his offense. Like, he was asked to play point guard so much. And Pina, you actually wrote a great piece at the start of the last season about,
he's smiling. You're teeing him up to kill me. Go
Booker.
ahead.
No. I'm smiling just because it was like the headline of that story was like Devin Booker is the best point guard in basketball. And I still get tweets from Dallas Maverick fans about it. But continue.
Classic. That's a hat tip to Dollinger is a headline writing for thanks, that buddy. One. Yeah. No, but so I think the biggest change is really just going to be the way that he gets his offense, and I think that could just play a lot of dividends for him. I actually wrote about this a few weeks ago after the Olympics, just seeing him go back to that role that he played at Kentucky, that we kind of expected him to be going into the season. He went on D'Angelo Russell's podcast and talked about how, he thought Miami was going to draft him because they were looking for like a Klay Thompson type. And then in the years since, he has turned into this like on-ball practitioner, really upped his playmaking ability, operates in the mid-range a ton, just like a lot of pick and roll, a lot of isolation, but he still has all of that off-screen stuff in his bag. And I likened it a little bit to, how the Warriors use Steph Curry. I think now that the Suns have a point guard, they can just go back to running Booker off all these screens. And he is, you don't want to compare a guy to Steph, but he's one of the few guys that has the stamina to just run around the court all day. Before Paul got there, he was consistently in the top 3 in distance traveled on offense in the season. He was one of the better off-screen guys, like really elite, shooting off screens, doing anything off screens too. And just when you pair that now with the creation ability that he has, I just think that it could really make his offense a lot more efficient and, more importantly, give the Suns a better offensive identity beyond what they had last season, which was really just, we have 3 great scorers, so get the hell out of the way, because that didn't really serve them either. It didn't accentuate all of Booker's strengths, but it didn't accentuate Beal's either, because he was working off that off-ball stuff a lot less too, and Kevin Durant as well. And those 3 guys are really elite at it. So when you have, I think it's a real boon to have superstars who have their differences, but also like when it comes to the main way that they get their offense, or that they can get their offense being the same, because it just makes it a lot easier to implement a system and to then work within it and find some wrinkles. So I think that is going to be really fun to watch, and I think it's almost intuitive. That's part of the reason I think they're a really interesting team. I wouldn't put them in. I don't think they're going to be holding the Larry O'Brien at the end of the season by any means. If they are, I think it's going to be because of the things that we're talking about. Because how much of what they need to change just makes a lot of intuitive sense, and they finally have like the little pieces that will allow them to do it. On the ant thing, I'm not. I'll leave you to it because I don't even know if we
have time to unpack that here, but there's no real take. It was just a sort of who's gonna. I feel like they're a little more neck and neck than people act like at times, because people were so ready for Ant to be there, and he has this. He's fun. Everybody wants it to happen, But I was just curious. I thought the Olympics were honestly an interesting reflection of where the two players are.
I think they were, and the one thing I would say is just that. Booker's in the part of the life cycle of the narrative around a superstar that gets really fickle. He's been around for a while and he hasn't won a championship yet. And we start to get impatient and we start to focus more on flaws than we do strengths. I think we see this happen a lot until a guy actually gets over the hump. But it takes this. It takes, the failure. It takes being around a while. And I think Ant will go through it. It's just that right now, Ant is in the portion that Booker was in probably around 2020 when all these superstars were like, yeah, I want to play with Devin Booker, when LeBron's complimenting him, KD's complimenting him, Chris Paul decides that of all the options he has, he's going to go play with Book. And we're seeing Ant get those compliments right now. We're seeing him have all this momentum behind him. But it really is, I think it can be an unfair comparison just because of where both those guys are in their career.
Do you want me to chime in on this?
Well, yeah, it's like your whole thing. Yeah.
I actually don't even remember I don't even remember this text. Did we have a text conversation about this?
I don't even remember. We were just bickering about something. A lot of random conversations break out between me and Pina that don't really go anywhere. With me, with everyone, honestly. Let's wrap up on the Suns. I mean, where the same thing we did with the Spurs here. Do we think that are they going to flame out in a similar way, or did they do enough really to do what Stuart was talking about? Are they in that contention threshold, or are they just below? What do you all expect from the Suns?
I think that the Western Conference playoffs are going to be very matchup dependent. So it's hard for me to say whether they'll win a series, lose in the first round, get to the conference finals. I think they're just so dependent on hot shooting. Like, I think they need Devin Booker and Kevin Durant to have like true shooting percentages above 65 in a 7-game series for them to win. I just think their defense is still going to be so problematic, and losing Frank Vogel, who was a big part of them being near the top 10 or in the top or whatever. I don't even know where they finished last year. First, by the way, in opposing 3-point percentage from the corners. So, little lucky, just going to throw that out there. But I think their defense is going to really be their comeuppance in the playoffs. And so, I agree with the fundamental belief that they will not win the championship.
I'll move on to my last one. Let's go to the Eastern Conference. I was going to do the Rockets, but we were so West heavy. I want to talk about the Orlando Magic. I know that's a subject of passion among this trio. The Magic this past season, they were coming out of the bubble. They did a total tear down. Obviously they get Paolo, they get Franz. It was a team that was sort of, I've always said that they were sort of running parallel to another Weltman experiment with the Bucks, where they were just accumulating all these just freaks, and then one of them hits, and then they pivot and start to focus on building around that. And I feel like the big primary kind of question here is how much of a primary is Paolo? I feel like how much is Franz better or worse than we thought, because he came out of the gates making us think that he was going to be. There were some arguments in the quieter spots of the internet where they were like, Franz is better than Paolo. I don't know if you guys have heard that or how that makes you feel. I've heard that. But they go out in the offseason this year and they pick up Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. I'd be curious to get your all's thoughts on that pickup. They go out and they get Christian De Silva from Colorado, who's a big guy that can space the floor and defend. What do we think that I'll just say I'm excited to watch the Magic because I think that they did a good job of doing what we're talking about, of maintaining their defensive identity, which I think is the thing that is, even though it was one series, they did have the best defensive rating in the playoffs and on a smaller sample. The big thing for them was solving some of these offensive questions to make Paolo's life easier. And I think they did that with the KCP signing. Do you guys expect them to level up this year, or do you share my excitement for the Magic? How are you feeling about Orlando this coming year?
I'm extremely high on Orlando. I wrote about them earlier this offseason. I think that I somewhat facetiously was asked for one of our roundtables, which team is going to give the Boston Celtics the biggest run for their money this season. And
you would assume that question was facetious.
No, my answer was facetious. But now that you say that, I agree that the question is pretty silly. And I said the Orlando Magic because not just because I think that they match up pretty well with Boston defensively. You can have one of the best defensive lineups in basketball, if not the best defensive lineup in basketball, with their size and their height and their length and their versatility and all that. But I just think rolling things over, like, I just respect so much how they valued continuity and internal growth. And I think Paolo's going to have a monster third year. He was an all-star in his second season. I think Franz's 3-point shooting in his second season, the dip, I think, will come back and level out a little bit. He's not an 18% 3-point shooter as he was after the all-star break. And I love the KCP pickup. I think KCP and Jalen Suggs is the second best defensive backcourt in basketball. And KCP just wins everywhere he goes. And he's super selfless. He's an unbelievable fit overall. And like just bringing back everyone on the bench too. Like it was a really smart way to keep their train going. And I like the talent, and I think the talent fits. So I just love Orlando. It wouldn't shock me if they had just a ridiculous regular season and finished with one of the 3 best records in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't even think I have a lot to add to that. I'm fully in agreement with you guys. I think if anything, like one thing, people talk about is like, the Franz extension, how we feel about, the money after the season he had. But honestly, I think that those guys like Paulo and Franz are such a nice yin and yang to each other. And, both have a really interesting mix of like creation and playmaking ability together, that I think is really complementary, which is like hard to find on the wings. And then, also it's just, those guys Paulo especially could go down and kind of be considered more of a front court player down the line. I'm really curious to see how his development goes. But yeah, I mean, like they're young, they're deep, they play really good defense, and they just seem poised for the leap. They seem like, like we talk about a team like Oklahoma last year, for example, where it felt like they had this embarrassment of riches in terms of, young players, in terms of, defensive energy, just because of, you don't have to pay them a lot, so you can afford to keep a lot of them on the roster. I think it's just going to be a really fun year of fact finding for Orlando, and I'm excited to see where they shake out at the end of the season.
Yeah, Orlando strikes me as a team that like they put out a really fun EP. They like a band that put out a really fun EP, and we're like, something could happen here, and we're just like waiting for the debut album. I kind of feel like that's what the Magic are similar to, and I think Pina's right. I think this year, if you combine the
chaperone of the 2024-2025 NBA season,
hit me with the throughout history of bands that at J. Kyle, man, that match sort of where the Magic are. But I do think that what you're saying is true, that they cumulatively have this youth that is very hungry after a frustrating playoff series, which really came down to a lot of spacing. Like we said, they defended well. They've got crazy switchability and strength, like penetration. They have containment, penetration, containment, and they have disruptive guys. But some of the problem is, I was going back through some of Paolo's on ball reps, and if you look at these sequences where Donovan and Niang and Okoro and Allen would all be within the paint because you didn't have to respect Isaac, and it just made it you didn't have to respect Isaac. Franz couldn't hit a shot. Suggs hasn't quite been the quarterback. I know he was an actual quarterback. I didn't mean to slip up in coincidence there, but he hasn't been quite the offensive quarterback that they thought, and they've pivoted nicely from that and rebounded from the fact that I guess another question too is the X factor of their the young guys. Do we see Anthony Black take a step forward? Do we Jett Howard, will he get on the court at all? I think that's probably the bigger question. But overall, I think this team could make a leap forward. Where do y'all think they could finish? I mean, what's the highest you could see the Magic finish? Is this a 50-win team, do you think, potentially?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm confident. I'm just really high on them.
You said you see them finishing third in the Eastern Conference.
Yes, I think top 3. I don't want to even put a ceiling on them because the Celtics won't have KP for over half the season. And I think other teams like the Paul George integration, the New York Knicks are going to be really good, but I just think that there's some questions with their roster and their identity. I just think Orlando comes in and they're hitting the ground running, and they're throwing in this piece, KCP, who is literally just the most perfect free agency, free agent to team fit that was this offseason, in my opinion. And yeah, I just think they'll be awesome from the jump. They know who they are.
They do know who they are. I think that I would almost put them above 50. I mean, despite everything that, you said about the spacing last year, they won 47 games, and didn't really have they in a season where they were trying to figure out all these things about what they're supposed to be. Now they added KCP. I wouldn't necessarily go and say that I think that they're going to be top 3 seed, just because I think that the East is really stacked at the top. The Celtics will sleepwalk their way towards a ton of wins regardless of KP's health. The Sixers are going to be awesome. I think the Bucks are going to bounce back. Those are probably my top 3 in the East, but I do see them Yeah, I mean, look, like I see more than a 3-win improvement from this team. So I think 50 games is beyond possible. It's like the bottom rung of what I think is realistic for them.
It always wigs me out on their basketball reference page to see Nick Anderson in a Grizzlies jersey. I think I've said this before on their anyway, it's just always jarring for me. Who would you say the over-under team is? If we had to pick an over-under team, is it the Pacers? Do you think that that's the team that's like over-under Pacers? That's what I would throw.
Can you please define? Can you define what over-under team means?
If we had to set like the line of like this team is pretty similar in terms of expectations, their ceiling is probably similar. I think the Pacers are kind of right there. Do you think that I get the impression that you think they're solidly over the Pacers. Would you say that's right, or what do you think?
I respect the Pacers. I think that the Magic. I think that the Magic are. I'm more high on them because I think just defense travels and defense is their identity for the regular season. I would say the Cavs actually would be my team instead of the Pacers here for the over/under team. I'm pretty high on the Cavs coming into this season too, like what they did at head coach, and I think that Evan Mobley is God, so they'll be good.
There are a lot of gods. I'm a polytheist when it comes to basketball, but and I would agree that Mobley is a god for sure. But I do, it's just interesting to think about like this process of reading into who a team is going to be and getting really excited about it, and then how quick, like Sirit was saying, you're the upstart, we get excited about you, and then you hang around and we start to pick you apart. And I feel like the Magic are kind of flirting. They obviously are indicating that they're ready to be more serious and make some moves here because they believe in their stars, and we'll be entering that phase where we might start to pick them apart, because the Cavs have done that. You remember a couple of years ago, the Cavs were like, that was the like upward, nod when you would talk to basketball fans, be like, you watch the fucking Cavs, how good they are. But we were a little more cynical about them, I feel like, these days. So that's going to be really fascinating to watch with the Magic, I think.
Before we go, can we just give our teams, the other teams, because we obviously don't have enough time to go into much depth about them, but just listing the other team that we're excited to watch this season?
Sure. I was going to go with the Pelicans. And I wouldn't say excited as much as intrigued, curious. Just want to know what's going to happen with them. They are going into the season as of September 5th. There's still time to make a trade. Brandon Ingram is still on the roster, and Daniel Theis is slated to be their starting center. If we had more time, I would ask Kyle to do for like an in-depth scouting report on Yves Missi and how he feels about him potentially playing like
runner, jumper, dunker. Game. We're done. 3 words.
Okay. All right. That was pithy. We appreciate that right now. But look, in the meantime, before they figure out what their roster is going to look like, I just think that this team has a lot of talent. They won 49 games last season without really even knowing what they are, with having a bunch of injury issues. Zion is at weight levels that we haven't seen since Duke, or maybe ever. I think that's very exciting. I know that we do Zion muscle watch a lot, but it just feels different this time, dare I say, knock on wood. The degree of it, and also just after watching what he did against the Lakers before he got hurt, makes me very, very excited. It's also the most September take that you can possibly have. But I want to see like the Zion at center with BI at the 4, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, DeJounte Murray, like super lengthy lineup. I also want to see CJ McCollum out of there. I want to see CJ out of there. I'm curious what BI looks like with a playmaking point guard like Murray out there. Like, let's get. I know that BI is obviously the biggest trade name, but I'm curious what they look like in the first 10-15 games of the season. And as much as I'm like, everybody's sick of the BI experience, I'm sick of McCollum on that team. It doesn't make any sense. Yes, he spaces the floor, but they need a connector. They don't need a guy that's like at this juncture in his career, like 6 feet tall and playing fake defense. They need
a connector. So Brandon Ingram's the man for the job for sure. All right. Sorry, I just had to mess with you there. I'll say mine really quickly. The Rockets. I think the Rockets are going to be really fun. I think they're going to be very similar to the way the Magic were a couple years ago. I think they're going to grind people into the dirt with some of their perimeter athleticism and switchability. They have a guy who could end up being one of the best perimeter defenders in the world, and Amin Thompson, and Jalen Green. The clock is ticking. I think that's what we would have talked about because he just did not shoot the ball well and did not provide the rim pressure that and efficiency that we would have liked to see. So I think this year is do or die for him. Pina, who was your team?
Memphis Grizzlies. And I am impossibly high on the Memphis Grizzlies. I think that nothing would surprise me about them this season in a positive sense.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they finished like fourth in the West this year, or like third or fourth. Like they're going to have some of the most nuclear epic fuck you energy that we've ever seen. Like
exactly.
Their fans on Twitter are hilariously bitter, like and ready. They're like, y'all forgot about us and we're going to come smack you. Like, what do y'all think about that? I mean, is third or fourth? Is that too high?
No, I mean Gigi Jackson hive, Zach Edey hive. Let's fucking go. You know, I'm ready for it. I'm excited.
Win the West. What do we? Let's go wild. Win the West. What if you had to put some odds on that? What do you think?
Give me the Grizzlies Thunder Western Conference Finals. Let's go. Just give it to me right now.
Yes.
I want to watch
going
it.
for it. I love it.
That's the one. That's absolutely the one.
Well, we were crazy to think that we were going to get through 6 teams, so that's great. But anyway, we got through 3, and I enjoyed it. It's all about we had a lot of technical trouble on my end. But anyway, thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening. Enjoy this calm before the frenzy of the regular season begins. I know you guys are probably chomping at the bit at this time of the year. Sear it, Michael, it was good to see both of you. I'll see you both soon in person, and we'll catch you next time.